Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler, and thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. This episode of Amateur Traveler is presented by Roam Right, a leading provider of travel insurance. How much did you spend on your last vacation? What if you couldn't travel? Would you get your money back? With the right travel insurance plan, you would. Buy Roam Right travel insurance and get covered for canceled trips, lost luggage, even medical emergencies. Visit roamright.com. That's ROAMRIGHT.com for more information.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 491. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about volcanoes and colonial cities, waterfalls and surfers, as we go to El Salvador.
More cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. We'll be talking more about our sponsor in a bit. In fact, you might want to keep in mind whether this is a trip you'd want to have travel insurance for. But now let's talk about El Salvador. I'd like to welcome to the show Joe Baur from joebaur.com, B-A-U-R. And Joe is a travel writer, filmmaker, and recently a podcaster. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And Joe, you have pitched me a destination that I have not been to in Central America. Where are we talking about today?
Talking about El Salvador, El Pulgarcito.
Excellent. And why should someone go to El Salvador?
Oh, God. The list for me is long, but I would say first and foremost, the reason I wanted to go there was I was living in Costa Rica at the time. My wife and I were doing a year abroad there, and honestly, my motives weren't too idealistic at first. It was just that a cheap flight came up from San Jose to San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, and we were living in Central America to see Central America. We weren't going to say no to a country just because of a less than stellar international image. But with the benefit of hindsight and having the ability to look back on our week in El Salvador and all the studying I did and research I did before going there and the follow-up conversations I've had with people I've kept in touch over there. I would just say the reason for anybody to go is because these countries where people aren't traveling, the generic North American or European travel, those countries where they're not traveling are the ones where you're going to have the most profound experiences. And that's what I found in El Salvador, right?
Now, you mentioned the less than stellar international reputation. So I want to say that I haven't really heard anybody talk about El Salvador in, 30 years. And so you say El Salvador, I think death squads. So, and I'm sure because I haven't heard about the country in 30 years, it hasn't changed at all, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people would say that. I mean, when we said we were going to El Salvador, I mean, my mother-in-law immediately sent us the FBI travel warning on El Salvador. And
there is still one.
There is. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I had a great experience, but I in the coverage I did on it on my website and for some publications, I do acknowledge the realities. I mean, there is a lot of danger.
And you say the FBI, I assume you mean the State Department travel.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, sorry, the State Department. There is a lot of things happening there. What they're infamous rather, is the gang violence, and the government has really stepped up their efforts to put down the gang violence, and a lot of people don't necessarily agree with that because it's basically just fighting fire with fire and it's getting really out of hand. And when we were there in about the second week of January, we had just pulled into our second stop along our week tour. We were in Xochitoro, El Salvador, beautiful colonial town. We pulled up to this hotel called Los Almendros de San Lorenzo that we had read was objectively the most beautiful hotel in all of El Salvador. To be fair, not a whole lot of hotel infrastructure in El Salvador, but this really was a phenomenal place. And the daily newspaper was out there, and it talked about how the country had already lost 2 police officers in the gang war. And this is the densest country in Central America. I'm not sure what the U.S. state equivalent would be, but I'm pretty sure it would be smaller than West Virginia. So to have 2 police officers already die within a couple of weeks was certainly newsworthy. But having traveled to various portions of the country and talking to people, from the perspective of a tourist, a traveler, somebody who might go there, everybody said tourists have been given carte blanche to travel the country wherever they want to go for the most part. There are places where the gangs are active that you wouldn't go. You just wouldn't go because you're either not interested or that's where the gangs are. And their fight is not with you. So we did not have a glitch the entire time. I've been to American cities where I felt like I was in far more danger than I ever felt in El Salvador. My wife can say the same. So it certainly wasn't our experience that danger was around every corner.
Okay. That being said, what did you do in El Salvador? What was your itinerary?
Our itinerary was interesting because we actually were working with a company, because we weren't scared going into it, but we certainly wanted to take every step possible to ensure that everything went swimmingly. And we were talking to a company that was just going to take us around to various different spots over the week. And then like a couple of days before we were going to leave, they just emailed us pretty tersely saying canceled. Not much more than that, just saying, sorry, I wish I could tell you more, but that canceled. And so we were hastily figuring out like what the hell we're going to do. We got to figure this out. And I'm firing off emails like I've never fired off emails before. And I'm a travel writer, so I know how to fire off an email or two. And to keep a long story short, we kind of figured it out as we were going. Basically, the group we were working with kind of moved us away from our original intention. And so this was actually a blessing in disguise. We were able to get back to the original idea we had. We started off in urban Santa Tecla, which is a smaller city that's just right outside of the capital, San Salvador. And it's kind of an artsy, bohemian little town. What little reading we had done on it before, we knew that it was going to be something where people had been moving back to kind of rehabilitate the area. It was shocking at first, and not in a bad way at all. We had come from Costa Rica, having seen a lot of that, and that was our only experience. Outside, we did make a stop in Bocas del Toro, Panama. And our experience of Central American cities was very different than what we found in Santa Tecla. In Costa Rica, a lot of towns I love there, but they are all pretty much the same, where there's the big central park anchored by a beautiful church.
Sure.
And that's just what it is. And it's nice, but there's not really any cities that really separate themselves in a very notable way. And Santa Tecla, as soon as we got through, like, holy hell, this is a city. Like, the buildings are like, they're on the street side. There was a sign for bikes. Previously, we hadn't seen much acknowledgement of two-wheeled transportation. So we get to Santa Tecla, and there's bike stands where you could lock your bike. There's little signs telling you, bike riders are going to be around here. It was beautiful buildings that were just brightly colored, cool little restaurants, the dive bars. It was really stunning. For our first stop, we had a private room, and it was called a hostel. I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a hostel. There were some dorm rooms, but what we stayed in was certainly not, didn't feel like a hostel. And we met up with the owner of that, who offered to just take us around. And one of the special things about El Salvador is that, especially for a tourist, it's going to be cheaper than Costa Rica or even some parts of Nicaragua, like if you go to Granada or Panama City. And you're going to get people who are just so passionate about the country that they want to boost tourism, that they're just going to show you things and you don't necessarily even need to pay for it. And so that was the experience with this hostel owner. He showed us around, gave us the whole story of the town, and our minds were just blown. There's these two beautiful parks that were unlike anything we had seen in Costa Rica, that were just beautiful public spaces where people could come around and hang out. He introduced us to some people. Then later that night, we met up with a friend of mine who I'd met online through a language exchange program. So one of the reasons we were down there is we wanted to improve our Spanish. And so I met somebody who also wanted to learn their English. And so she said, I live in Santa Tecla, you should meet up. She took us out for ice cream that was supposedly done in a local style. It was just phenomenal. And by the end of the night, we ended up having pizza at this bizarre cacophony of American culture and Latino culture. It was like Dean Martin was playing, but there was like cowboy paraphernalia out. It was bizarre, but in a wonderful way, that we were just having the time of our lives, and our whole entire worldview of what to expect in El Salvador was blown out the window. And again, never felt even the slightest aspect of danger. And so then after Santa Tecla, we only spent one night there. We took the same driver who took us from the airport, which is not right in San Salvador. It's actually a little bit of a drive away. It's between the Pacific coast and San Salvador. He picked us up again, and this time we went to Xochitoro that I mentioned before. Beautiful colonial town. I mean, a lot of people want to go to Antigua, Guatemala, Grenada, Leon, and Nicaragua to get their feel for the Central American colonial town. But this place, it was a lot of that, perhaps smaller in scale, but you're going to be the only tourist there for the most part. I mean, there are some businesses that cater to tourists, but I didn't see any other U.S., American, Canadian, European travelers the entire time I was there. We didn't really have a set itinerary. It was mostly just walking around and seeing what came up. And we wanted to go to Xochitoro because I was trying to follow the history of El Salvador that I had been reading about beforehand. I read this fantastic book by Joe Frazier, not the boxer, who was a reporter for, I think it might have been AP. I could be wrong about that. But he was a reporter covering the Civil War in El Salvador that was going on through the 80s. And that was kind of like my backstory for it all. And Xochitoro is in Frente Farabundo Martí para la Liberación country, which is the FMLN. You see those signs everywhere when you're traveling around El Salvador. And that's the guerrilla party that was fighting against the Arena party, which was in power.
Right.
And that was what the United States was backing up. And going to El Salvador, you learn a lot about American history that we're not necessarily taught. And so we wanted to go to Xochitoro to see more of that history, and also because we had heard it's a colonial town. Costa Rica doesn't really have colonial towns just because of a different history with the Spaniards at the time of colonization.
Let's take a break here and hear from our sponsor. When planning your trip, you probably don't want to think about the bad things that can happen, but the truth is, stuff happens all the time. Your flight may get canceled, your luggage may get lost, you might not even get to go on your trip because you get sick right before you're scheduled to leave. All of these events are covered by Roam Right Travel Insurance. Roam Right also covers more severe situations. Have you thought about what you would do if you needed emergency medical treatment in a foreign country? How would you communicate with the doctors? What if you needed to be evacuated home? Your primary medical insurance may not cover these expenses, but travel insurance can help. One Roam Right traveler racked up close to $117,000 in medical bills on an air ambulance ride from Europe to the United States. His Roam Right travel insurance policy, just $28. When booking your next trip, you'll want to get your travel insurance as soon as you make your plans. Early bird benefits include a pre-existing medical condition waiver and the option to upgrade to cancel for any reason coverage. These are the benefits you just can't get if you wait too long. To get your free travel insurance quote for your next trip, visit roamright.com. That's ROAMRIGHT.com. And thanks to Roam Right for sponsoring this episode.
And so in this town, we got to meet up with the hotel owners at the hotel I mentioned before, Los Almendros de San Lorenzo. Incredible hotel on these just cobblestone streets. And the owners were just fantastic to us. One of them had been an ambassador, I believe, to Europe for El Salvador, and he met his partner there in France. And then so the Frenchman came back and just fell in love with El Salvador at first sight. And so now they're running this hotel together. They treated us to dinner. It was just got to hear a little bit more about what's going on. And just on the note about safety, at one point, I mean, I travel writer, filmmaker, I have my big obnoxious camera at my side at all times. And at one point I even asked him, like, it's okay for us to walk around with the camera, right? And he just laughed at me. He said, nobody cares. Like, we have this kind of perception ingrained in us, at least some people, I think, that people in other countries are going to see the American and be like, get him. But that has not been my experience in all of Central America, and certainly not in El Salvador, which a lot of people would be most afraid of. While in Xochitoro, we also got introduced to this phenomenal woman named Peggy. She was an American nun who had been working in El Salvador before, during, and after the Civil War. She's still there at the Centro Arte para la Paz. So we just kind of stumbled across that center. We met an individual there who had lived during the Civil War, heard his story, asked us, what we knew about it. And that's another thing that was special about El Salvador, that unlike Costa Rica or some of the other countries where they're more accustomed to seeing tourists, everybody there who saw us would be asking, what are you doing here? And not in an aggressive way, just truly inquisitive. What are you doing here? Then we explain, well, we wanted to see a country that people aren't really going to. We wanted to see what's special about it. And they truly appreciated that. And then they would, say, oh, you got to go here. Oh, you're only going here. How could you do that? You got to go over here. And just kept really trying to expand a limited itinerary within a limited amount of time. So everybody was just incredibly welcoming there. The gentleman at Centro Arte para la Paz was certainly no exception. So we were there, just got some more of the history, just a lot of walking around, just kind of really taking it in. Then on the way out, we had one of our favorite moments of the whole trip on our way out. It was recommended that we take a cab over to this where there was supposed to be a waterfall, but it wasn't the rainy season, so there wasn't any waterfall. But we found this little kid who was just jumping around everywhere. He found us and he wanted to take us to show things. And he just kept saying, soy mono, I'm a monkey. And he was crawling the trees and just being really goofy because he saw the camera. So I think he was playing it up a bit. But granted, I'm sure, don't know his whole story, but those are the things that stick out to me, especially in a country that the general perception is you can't go because it's not safe. Here's this little kid who's just running around having the time of his life. And then it made me think back to a lot of the stories that I've read about of kids running around the States. Now there's this whole craze of parents getting arrested because they let their kid walk a few blocks between school and their house at the age of 5 or something. And I don't know, I just thought that was something that stuck out to me, not necessarily in a way that I can articulate too well, obviously, but it was just something special that really stuck with us.
Okay. By the way, you asked earlier the size of El Salvador. It is the size of Massachusetts and almost the same population. Both have between 6 and 7 million.
Right. So yeah, I think in Joe Fraser's book, he talks about the size, and I think he does mention Massachusetts. So yeah, it's not a big country, and that's another great thing for travelers. A lot of people, and I don't want to seem like I'm picking on Costa Rica. I love Costa Rica. I consider it like a second home after having spent a lot of time there. But with El Salvador being in the densest country in Central America, you can get everything, as we did within our week. You can get everything like that and really quickly. I mean, we were in a very urban area where there's a lot of artists and a lot of cool things going on, nice restaurants, maybe 2 hours or so, whatever it was, up to Colonial Xochitoro, quiet. There's a lake. It's peaceful, just completely different atmosphere. Then after that, we took another 2-hour about ride, and we went to Cerro Verde, which is a national park, and it's in an area they call the Tres Volcanes, 3 volcanoes. There's, as we hint at, 3 volcanoes in the area. This one was an Airbnb stop. It was called Los Sueños Verde. Beautiful property, but in order to get up there, we're in this massive pickup truck where, we're on a normal road. Then he turns right, and he's like, okay, now we're going to start going up. And then just over time, this road narrows, and it gets more narrow and narrow. And suddenly we're on what could be generously described as a hiking trail on a massive pickup truck, just bouncing our way up this mountain. But once we got there, we're face to face with this volcano called Izalco, which, looking up later, we found out was, geologically speaking, it's a very young volcano. It was only formed, I think, in the mid-18th century. And it's one of those science project volcanoes that just shaped perfectly. So great for picture taking, great for doing the time-lapse sunsets. And it's just a completely different, because we're really high up, completely different climate up there. We had pretty warm but still comfortable weather when we were down in Santa Tecla and Xochitoro. But up here, it got cold at night. And so this was kind of our rural El Salvador experience. Being up there, there was a caretaker for the property up there at the same time named Santiago, who was fantastic for showing us around to the different hikes. We did this hike up Volcan Santa Ana to this beautiful crater. And of all the hikes I did in all of Central America during our time abroad, that one definitely sticks out as my favorite. Besides just the topography, there was a lot of diversity. I mean, it felt like you were hiking in woods at first, and then suddenly it felt like you were hiking maybe Camelback in Phoenix. And then you're at the top, and you see this just turquoise, beautiful blue crater down beneath you. And then you have this unbelievable panorama of just nothing but nature. And I feel like it's an experience that you can't necessarily get in Costa Rica because the tourism industry is much larger there. There's just going to be more stuff there. And in El Salvador, it was just like we had found, I hate to be, I don't like to be the traveler who thinks like, this is my first time, I discovered it. But it really did feel like we found a special place in a special country. And so after that, we pretty much just kind of relaxed back at the property. I mean, and this place was nice because it cut off your connection to the world. No cell phone signal, nothing. You really just, you pass the time being in nature for sure. And, we got to talk with Santiago more and learn a little bit more about the country. And like I said, this is another one of the special layers about El Salvador, that you meet people who were heavily involved in some pretty heavy recent history. And I don't know if it was okay, if it wasn't, but he was patient with me. And I asked him, obviously he spoke Spanish and my Spanish isn't fluent, but there was just something between our level of, my level of Spanish and maybe just him being a little bit more rural that we were having a hard time understanding one another. But he was incredibly patient with me, and I got up the courage to ask him about his involvement in the Civil War, and he said that he fought for the government. So that would be the Reina, the opposing folks to the ones in Xochitoro where FMLN is kind of a stronghold there. And he just said, yeah, I fought for the government, and he just kind of nonchalantly waved his hand northeast, pointing back towards Xochitoro area, saying, yeah, that area was FMLN. But he said it in such a nonchalant way that really hit me, because this is such recent history, such a bloody civil war, that I have to imagine he didn't think of these people as like lifelong enemies, like might be the aftermath of a lot of other conflicts. I mean, he said it with the same intensity that I might say, oh no, I want my coffee black, no cream please. Just matter of fact that no, they're over there. And that's another thing about El Salvador. I mean, they just had this awful civil war, but at least politically speaking, the fighting is just huge, obnoxious political banners, and you'll see those all throughout the country. I mean, that's something that almost every Salvadoran or immigrant from the United States who, for one reason or another, was now living in El Salvador said that they were really angry about the international press. They don't feel like they get enough credit for the fact that they had a really horrible civil war, but have been able to keep both. Reina is still a political party, and FMLN has since achieved the presidency, and they feel they don't get enough credit for maintaining the peace afterward. Obviously, they have their problems with the gangs, but that's just something that we heard a lot of. After Cerro Verde, we headed down the mountain for our final stop of the week, and that was El Tunco, which I had read about, I believe, in Joe Frazier's book, El Salvador Could Be Like That. And had seen it referenced elsewhere, where it's a surfer town that had been settled by surfers for well before the Civil War, during, and after. The idea being kind of that surfers will surf wherever. They don't care about what else is going on. They're just, doesn't matter to them. They're going to surf. And I mean, and it is a surfer's town, but it just looked like no other surfer town that I had seen before. I mean, it had this really cool pedestrian-only walkway that led to the beach in the center of, I guess you could call it a town. I mean, big, flat, wide sand. Gets a little rocky, but once you get in the water, it wasn't one of those beaches where once you get in the water, you're kind of tiptoeing because the floor is completely rocky and you're just scraping up your feet. This was just one of the most beautiful beaches we had ever been on. And in our experience, this is the only place where we saw significant tourism, and that we even heard much English. I would also say that if you're going to travel to El Salvador, unless you have a guide with you the whole time, it'd be a good idea to know some Spanish, because we had a lot of people, like I said, a lot of people were curious as to why we were there. We saw it even when we were hiking. We had like a guy in a pickup truck pulled over while we were hiking. It was just like, hey, how's it going? But they just jump right in Spanish, which, makes sense. It's their language. But in Costa Rica, because I think they're so used to seeing tourism, either they speak English, they'll just jump at you with English and assume you don't speak Spanish, which unfortunately is the case for a lot of travelers coming down there, or they just won't talk to you because they again assume you don't speak Spanish and they're just not going to bother. But because tourism is a growing thing in El Salvador, you see the curiosity as to what you're doing there, but they must just assume that you speak Spanish because why else would you go there without the tourism infrastructure? But if you don't speak Spanish, I don't want that to turn you off. There are tour guide companies that you can find, and it's certainly a lot more affordable there than it is in some of the more tourism-heavy Central American countries. So it could be affordable for a lot of people to have a guide with them, and that could be just as great an experience because you still be getting the stories. But then back to El Tunco, I mean, that's, I was talking about Cerro Verde, incredible climate difference, just chilly at night, cool breeze, very windy at night, especially. And then we went back down, we're on the Pacific beach now, and it's humid. I mean, this is like melting stuff during the day. I mean, people, the hotel, we stayed at this new place called Boca Solas that usually more intended for a longer stay, but they were new, so they were taking guests anyhow. And it was a receptionist who was actually Swiss, who had kind of similar story in that she was, going to go backpack through Central America, was told don't go to El Salvador, went anyway. And she met somebody there and married him. And so she's there and was saying, how she has no plans to leave, loves it there. But she did say that you can tell if it's the hottest part of the year because people will walk based on where shadows are. So as the sun's going and you find which side of the street people are on, they're going to be on the side with the shadows. But, you can hop in the water and you're going to be fine. People are going to be playing soccer on the beach. And really, it was just like, throughout the trip, we were just loving each thing more and more. And we didn't want to say anything out loud to each other because we thought if we say something out loud, something's going to happen. It's going to be ruined because we're going to jinx it. But once we were in El Tunco, kind of sitting on the beach with Salvadoreños and other travelers watching this beautiful sunset, and you can see the silhouettes of the surfers because that's when the waves hit best. We were like, okay, I think we can say it now. This is a phenomenal country. And we're going to be coming back here for sure. And that wasn't even the end. I mean, we had that beautiful night. And then, again, when I was talking about before about you get these connections in these countries with little tourism where people just want to show you things. And that Swiss receptionist pointed us to, it was her husband's brother. So her brother-in-law, I believe, was basically like, yeah, he'll take you on a hike if you want. And this wasn't any designated hike in a metropolitan park or a national park. This was just a trail he used to do when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. And he said hadn't been changed at all. So he takes us down. It's pretty steep going down, but perfectly safe. And it was to a set of waterfalls. So if you imagine you're hiking down, and then you get to kind of like a flat bed of rock, and then you're surrounded by some modest waterfalls. I mean, it's not Niagara or anything, but it's just kind of some nice, pretty waterfalls that you could jump into if you want. I chickened out and only did like the 6-foot jumper. Oh, I should... Not like you could fact check me on me. I did the 30-foot jump. I think you could fact check on me if anything. But so we're just having a blast with this guy, and he's talking about living in El Salvador and how much he likes it. And we're walking back up, and there's this group of school kids that are just playing in the river, and they have their chaperones. And that's when it really hit me that I was like really kind of shaking my head at all the foreboding warnings that we got. Like, don't go there. And one of the things that really bothers me is when people put down somebody's hometown that they really identify with. And everybody from El Salvador was telling me like, oh, you live in Costa Rica? That's cool. El Salvador is better. Like, there's a lot of pride there, even not necessarily justifiable pride. And I say that only because a lot of people hadn't necessarily been to Costa Rica to really judge the two, but they just they love the country so much that they just instinctively believe that this is a great place. And so we're watching these kids that are just having a time of their lives playing in this river. And I was thinking, who are these people to say, don't go to El Salvador? It's too dangerous. You just shouldn't travel there. And yet there's these little kids that are just having the time of their lives. And I couldn't imagine that anybody would go to these kids and say, yeah, you shouldn't be here. It's really dangerous. And I just feel like that level of ignorance needs to be corrected. So that's what really drove me to afterwards just try to do my own publishing on it for my own various websites. And I'm still talking to different people. Any chance I get talking to a new contact at a publication, I'll be like, if you haven't covered El Salvador, I need to do that for you. And I've done that at a couple places. And that's the first thing I thought of when you said you were looking for some new destination. I was like, if he hasn't talked about El Salvador, we got to talk about El Salvador. I feel like I've almost become a quasi-ambassador as far in the travel world because everybody, we met at T-Bex, and over there I was telling everybody, El Salvador, if you haven't gone, go. Everybody's talking about Cuba right now, which, don't get me wrong, I want to go to Cuba. But they're talking about it from the perspective like, oh, we want to get there before tourism really gets in there and we could see it for what it is now. And I want to do that too. But you can do that now with El Salvador. It's pretty untouched as far as tourism goes. And if you go, it's kind of a trite or cliche word to use, but you're going to get an authentic experience if you go to El Salvador.
And the one thing I want to caution a little bit here, I don't want to diminish your enthusiasm for El Salvador, and I haven't been there and you have. But in terms of safety, and I feel like we're harping on this a little bit, but whenever you go someplace, I think it's useful to read the State Department's warnings and then just kind of put it in context. And theirs does start with, tens of thousands of U.S. citizens safely visit El Salvador every year for study, tourism, cruise ship visits, business, and volunteer work. That's kind of the good news. But the bad news is there have been 34 U.S. citizens who have been killed since 2014 there. So do you have any guidance in terms of places that you should avoid? Because obviously, even a country the size of Massachusetts, even if you were in Massachusetts, there are places you should go and places you would avoid.
The only thing I could think off the top of my head was, I think, so the overall county, or I don't know if they use county or canton like in Costa Rica, but El Tunco is in the state, whatever you want to call it, of La Libertad. And La Libertad is a coastal city.
Right, kind of in the middle of the coast.
Correct.
Not far from San Salvador.
Yeah, and you're really not far from anything. San Salvador is going to be close to just about everything. It's a tiny, really tiny country, but that was a place that we had heard, like, you don't necessarily need to go to. Santa Ana as well. When we were in Santa Tecla, we met somebody from Santa Ana who was saying, like, oh, no, it's fine, you can come. And they know their context. They know places not to go. I can't give you really too many specifics on places not to go.
Okay.
Because the overwhelming feedback had been that nobody is going to take you any place. I mean, sure, you could, on your own, you could hop on a bus and go to anywhere in the country. But if you don't speak Spanish, I would just recommend hiring a driver because it's going to be an ease of mind thing. I've traveled to countries where I don't speak the language, and it's just an ease of mind that if you just have somebody who knows what they're doing. I have a friend, a fellow travel writer, who does a lot of solo traveling and writes a lot about solo female traveling. And she did just a layover tour of El Salvador, had a long layover there, and just a guy picked her up in a cab and just showed her around. And she had said the same to me, that the guy wasn't interested in having her experience any danger because they're very cognizant of what their reputation is. They want people to go back and say they had a good time in El Salvador. I had the hotel folks in Suchitoto saying, oh, don't worry about your camera. But then when we went on the hike to Cerro Verde, all the information says to go with police escort. And that might sound like a huge red flag, but we actually,
yes.
Yeah, and I get that. And I mean, to me, that was my experience across Central America, was that they are very cautious and very protective when it comes to tourism. And I don't know if that's just because they know of what the general reputation from history of Central America is. Because, like I said, and throughout of all of Central America, we never had anything that felt remotely scary. And so this police escort, I mean, this wasn't, Secret Service escorting President Obama. This was us coming to the post where the hike started, realizing we had just missed them. We went and caught up. I don't even know if he had a weapon. It was just a guy in a nice-looking police uniform that had the country's flag on his shoulder, and that was about it.
So this was a regularly scheduled hike or something?
A lot of it is very informal. Like, we actually showed up, and there was different people walking by were like, oh, no, they pick up at this time. And so what I would say, if you're going to do anything that's kind of remote, you're just going to have to be patient and talk to people and see what times that they offer, because it's not like in El Tunco, they'll have websites where you'll find out what kind of surfing you can do or whatever activities. But for some of the more remote areas, it's just going to be knowing, okay, there's a volcano there. I know I can hike it. I'm just going to have to get there and talk to people and figure out what time makes the most sense. And it'll get done. I mean, the day we decided let's go hike Santa Ana, we just kind of got up early and started working our way to where our guide Santiago said the entrance was, and just kind of figured it out from there, and everything was fine. But back to your question about what places to avoid. At Bocazolas and El Tunco, we met with a U.S. American who had married a Salvadoran, and she was involved with this hotel. And so she met up with us and gave us some talk. And she was the one who actually told us, tourists have carte blanche to go wherever you want. Nobody wants to mess with tourists. Her father-in-law had actually been in the government during the Civil War, so we got to chat with him about it. And the general perception was just that there are places that you don't want to go, and you can research them beforehand. I'm sure you could talk to people who are living there on the ground. It can tell you specifically where not to go. But that's the beauty of El Salvador, how dense it is. I would just tell, if you're going to go to El Salvador, do the trip that I just explained, because you're going to get a little bit of everything. You get an urban city with a little bit of art and culture. You get history with Suchitoto, with the colonial stuff. You get the outdoors in Cerro Verde. and then you get the beach to relax in El Tunco. There are some other spots that I've actually heard more of like some other places that you should go on a return visit, but not necessarily places that you shouldn't go.
Okay. I think we've beaten that dead horse here.
Sure.
So I want to move on here. What surprised you?
The first thing that comes to my mind is how curious they were to see us there. And I talked about already at length about how they see us and they say, "Oh, what you doing here?" And they're just incredibly welcoming. I've been fortunate enough to travel a lot, and I've never been to a country like El Salvador that had that reputation and that tourists were not going to pretty much at all. That's just what stuck out to me, was that everybody was kind of surprised to see us there, asked us what we were doing, and then once that was out of the way, they would just say, "Thanks for coming. I hope you come back. I hope you go tell people that you had a good time," and so that they'll come too.
Okay. As we go to wrap this up, before I get to my last 4 questions, what else should we know?
Like I mentioned before, I do think it's good to go in there knowing a little bit of the history. The U.S. history with El Salvador isn't the cleanliest of histories, and to just be cognizant of that, I think is helpful in talking to people. Like I said, we were at the Center of Arts in Suchitoto. I mean, the guy was wondering, do you know that your country supported the arenas who were doing, like you said in the very beginning, the death squads and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And I think he responded better to us because we said, yeah, we read about that. And we're able to be honest with him that we weren't necessarily thrilled with the history, but that we were at least cognizant of it. And I think that opened him up to us a little bit more and therefore gave us another side of El Salvador that maybe we wouldn't have been able to experience otherwise.
Okay. You're standing in the prettiest spot in El Salvador that you saw. Where was it? What are you looking at?
Oh, God, I'm having a side-by-side image fight of the view from Los Sueños Verde, looking at the Volcán Izalco, the sunset, but then it's like kind of trying to push into the frame is the Central Park of Suchitoto, where there's this beautiful colonial church. There were kids riding in circles on their bikes. And so I don't know which one wins out of that. They're very different experiences, but they're in my head just kind of running into each other like the Sunday Night Football helmets or something.
I love the fact that as I think of that question, I'm thinking of still photography, and you clearly are thinking of video. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh, and say only in El Salvador.
I don't know if this counts because part of it that makes me laugh was after the fact, but pupusas are the food of El Salvador. They're like these.
I happen to be a big fan of pupusas.
Oh, that's excellent. So if some folks who might not be familiar with it, it's like a handmade corn tortilla, and they fill that with cheese.
A little thicker tortilla than usual, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, and they stuff that with cheese, some kind of meat, usually pork, and refried beans. And like I said, obviously this country connected to me in a special way. And after our trip, I started hearing this song called "A mí me gusta las pupusas," and it's just this ridiculous, silly song about pupusas. And then I found out that they have actually, it just happened. I think it was November 2nd. They have a National Pupusa Day. And so whenever I just all mixed together just makes me smile.
And basically the song is "I love pupusas."
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. For our non-Spanish speakers in the audience.
Sorry.
Excellent. Finish this sentence for you. You really know you're in El Salvador when what?
Oh boy. When you're looking at national park scenery, volcano by night, and then in the morning you're relaxing on the beach. And people coming up to welcome you and tell you, thanks for coming. I hope you come back, and I hope you share this experience with other people.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize your experience in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I could sit here and try to think of something more profound, but I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is special, because that's how it connected with me, and that's how it clearly connects with so many Salvadorans who are living there. Fun, just fun. I mean, I don't need to overthink it any more than that. It's just fun. The people are just. Everybody who talked to us was smiling, laughing, whether it was in the urban Santa Tecla or up in Suchitoto and having a quiet drink with the hotel owners or relaxing on the beach and just talking to people who passed by. It was just a constant stream of fun.
Okay.
Then last but not least, unexpected.
Okay.
I think
Excellent.
No matter anybody who's going to go there is going to, even anybody who listened to me yammer on about El Salvador, even if they were to retrace my steps perfectly, there's no way that they would come away from that being like, yeah, that's pretty much what I expected. They're going to, even if you retrace my steps, you're going to come back and just be like, wow, I did not see that coming, did not expect that. And everybody's experience is going to be different. Hopefully as good as mine, but no matter what, it's going to be an unexpected experience.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Joe Baur. Joe, where can people read about your travels?
They can just go to my website, creatively titled joebaur.com. Again, Baur. All the videos and words are up there.
And is there one article or video about El Salvador that you would recommend particularly?
Of mine, if you just go, I have, like the menu bars. If you go under travel, Central America, and then just click on El Salvador, it's got all my stuff there. But I did do a 4-part series breaking it up from Santa Tecla, Suchitoto, to Cerro Verde, to El Tunco. And at the top of each of those articles, I think they're about 800 words apiece, so I wanted to split it up so people would actually maybe read them. At the top of each of those articles is a video, kind of like a travelogue music video of our week in El Salvador. So even if you don't want to sit down and read the words, or you got enough of my yammering and you don't need to get that experience in written form, you can just go watch the video and get a sense of what a week in El Salvador is like.
Excellent. Well, Joe, thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for El Salvador.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
In news of the community, first, my apologies. The microphone sound for this episode may have sounded very different during the interview. My microphone broke. The microphone I've been using for a number of years now just gave up the ghost. I've done 1,100 episodes, many of them with that microphone, and I just got my replacement microphone now, so we should be better in the future. We got some great feedback on the episode we did on Moscow. We got 2 very long comments, and I'm going to read part of one today that came from Randy from Annapolis, Maryland. Randy said, I had the opportunity to visit Moscow in the summer of 2005. Our small group visited Moscow for several days before and after traveling to southern Siberia for a whitewater rafting trip on the Katun River. Moscow was our gateway and staging city for traveling to Barnaul, Siberia. There are definitely lots of interesting things to see and do in Moscow, good food and restaurants too. Which is true, we didn't really get into the food scene. We just kind of ran out of time with the Moscow episode. He says the Kremlin museums are nice, the changing of the guard at the Kremlin is impressive, St. Basil's and Red Square are amazing, and visiting the Lenin Mausoleum and saying hello to Vladimir is one of the most bizarre and surrealistic experiences I have ever had. I do recommend it. Probably the most memorable overall experience was simply standing in Red Square, taking in the entire surrounding view with beautiful St. Basil at the end, the Kremlin and Lenin's tomb on one side, and the old Soviet department store mall opposite. As the child of the Cold War, it was a pinch-me experience. Randy says the logistics of visiting Russia was probably the most difficult that I had encountered in all my travels. I've traveled to all 7 continents and visited some rather obscure places and countries, and yet I found the logistics of visa, travel reservations, permits, and bookings for Russia to be the most difficult of any place I have traveled. It rivals, if not surpasses, traveling to Tibet. This was with my rafting company taking care of most things. I couldn't imagine taking care of everything completely on my own. I'm not sure if the logistics of traveling there is still as difficult. It is probably easier now. For all of Randy's comment, go to the Moscow episode. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. Remember, we have that trip coming up in April to Cambodia, the Amateur Traveler trip. You can find more details now on the website under the Book Travel tab. Thanks to J-Way Travel, experts in Eastern European travel, for the transcription of this episode. If you have any questions, send me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, do what Randy did and leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.